Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Unscripted and Unchoreographed. I'm your host, Neve, the actor, and we have Sarah, the dancer. And today we are very excited to have a wonderful artist in, Ali Clarke.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's lovely to be invited to have a chat about artistic practice. It's just nice to have those conversations, especially with people from different disciplines and share your experiences.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. We're very excited to have you. So I suppose to start with, Ali, if you wouldn't mind just telling us how you got into the arts. Was it a very young age? Was it kind of later in life? Did you have family in the arts, or how did you end up in this mad world?
I always blame my mother, and I suppose it is kind of on her shoulders. I had no interest. I mean, not no interest. I was interested in art, but like in a hobby format from a young age. But in no way was I thinking about becoming an artist until I think I was 14, and I was kind of doing those, musical theatre classes with my friends, and my mom saw me on stage dancing, and she just was like, "Oh, I'm going to send you to some dance classes." And I think within 6 months of her forcing me like into a leotard into a dance class at 15, I was absolutely mortified. Came back about 6 months later and was like, "Ma'am, I'm going to be a dancer." So she lost the young psychologist I was going to become. History was made at that point, I suppose. For me, it was not really any going back once I got a taste for the blood, I suppose.
Can I ask, what musicals were you doing, or do you have a favourite musical?
I just like the dance elements of it. I was never much of a singer. I think this dance she saw me, Michael Jackson, or I think he's in the Jackson 5, like ABC. That one, so really silly, kind of just boppy up and down dancing. And my mom was like, "You've got rhythm." I didn't know anything about dance. I just enjoyed bopping around on stage. I do still like the odd musical, but it tends to be the kind of more modern stuff rather than the classics, which my sister would be really into.
And is your sister in the arts? Did she go into musical theatre?
She did, and then she didn't. She did, and then she hated it, which was absolutely fair, as a lot of us know. It's not the nicest place to be. The best of times. So yeah, no, she went to some of the professional training and then just decided that it was an unkind space to be working in.
Totally fair. Musical theatre, you have to do everything.
Absolutely. And I think from my own experience where I studied, I did the contemporary dance course, and then there was a musical theatre course as well. It was definitely much more of a focus on body typing and image than there would have been for us. At least for me, I definitely wouldn't have survived that level of scrutiny that they were under. So I have a lot of empathy for anyone who goes into that field and encounters that real barrier based on stuff you just cannot control.
So you started dancing. What happened next?
I suppose I was doing kind of the ballet modern and, had the dreams of working in Disney, because that's just the only thing you can really think about when you're kind of 15. And that was when I kind of fell into Dublin Youth Dance Company and realised that there was another way to go, which suited me much more because I don't have the physical capacity nor the emotional capacity for the kind of heavy technical world of ballet and jazz and all that. So it much more suited what I was looking for from dance, which is kind of that more emotional connection with movement. After leaving cert, I did a year in Inchoreographed because I had so little training at that point. I'd only been dancing for 3 years. I did that foundational year and then I auditioned abroad, and I ended up in Fonties in the Netherlands, largely because it was the cheapest option and I didn't come from huge amount of money, so it just seemed like the right option. But I think in the end it suited me well. It was a very creative course. I enjoyed it. It was hard, but I think Sarah can attest, any kind of physical training that you go through in dance is always going to be tough mentally and tough physically. There's like the physical element, which obviously was incredibly tough, and I think it is for everyone in their own ways. And I was very prone to injury, so I was in and out of ankle braces the whole time. But I think there's also kind of that mental jump as well. Like there's something about art education that requires you to grow up really fast. And I think some other educations, you kind of have a bit more of a gliding entry into adulthood. But there's a lot of art education where you're expected to be emotionally intelligent very quickly after leaving secondary school. And if I think about me at 18 and then me in college, there was a huge kind of just heavy cut there, and where suddenly you're expected to be making these very mature pieces of art that have worldly views. I definitely wasn't ready emotionally, and I definitely wasn't fed slowly enough for that. But I suppose you can't really do that particularly slowly because you've got such a short time. But yeah, it was definitely an interesting shift at the time. So when I would have been teen, pre-professional, there was only really DYDC. Now there's a lot more youth companies, which is great, but we had people traveling up from all over the country, and because it was kind of the only place where young people could get access to contemporary dance. It was still very much in the kind of amateur schools. It was ballet, modern, tap, hip hop, but that kind of contemporary piece wasn't really in place yet. And then Fonties, there was a huge trend for a while of Fonties for a couple of reasons. One of them was that they came to Ireland and did their first round audition in Dance House. So I didn't really have them on my list for a number of reasons. It just wasn't my first choice. And then I just went to the audition because it was there and it was free, and why not? And it was only in that audition that I went, wow, I actually really like their ethos. They are also significantly cheaper. So for me, like, the UK wasn't on the list. So I know there's a lot of people who got great training in the UK, but you do have to have some financial support to do that. And I think Fonties just gave people that option who didn't necessarily come from the background to have that, or didn't want to spend the money that they did have on their training.
Like a free audition, like that is not a thing. I know, especially in the UK, but that is very good.
We still had to go over for the second round, but I also think that was important to see the place you're auditioning for. But it kind of gave you that little entry point that you didn't have to think too much about. And also you meet some of the key teachers, which just gives you that sense of what you're actually getting into. I did a couple of other auditions, but I just didn't have the same feeling with them. So I definitely was won over in that kind of free audition moment. I remember being absolutely terrified at every single stage of every single audition I did at that point. Like, you know, it was a big fish, small pond situation where the Irish dance scene is small anyway, but then you're in your own kind of backyard amateur dance school and you're like, oh yeah, no, I'm doing really well. And then you go to an audition in the UK with 500 people and you just realize, like, I actually know nothing. So that's what I did actually at 18, straight out of secondary school. I went to an audition in Northern Contemporary in Leeds, and like within 20 minutes, I was like, I am out of my depth. I don't know anything. So that's why I went then a year to Inchoreographed, because I realised I just don't have the same level, because we don't have the same dance education for young people in Ireland. It was fair. But I suppose the only kind of prep that was really needed, you did need a solo. And the blessed Marianne from DYDC was the best coach for that. She worked us all through it and made sure that we were feeling prepared for that, which was fantastic to have a guide and a mentor for that. Because I think if you've never created anything, even creating like a 30-second solo, you're just kind of piecing together movements you've learned from someone else, but she kind of brought us out of that, which was great. Yeah, I suppose what drew me in, I just really liked that the teachers that we had as part of the audition, they became kind of core teachers for the whole course. They were really emphasizing moving. This was really core to them, as they can teach you technique, but they can't teach you to emote and they can't teach you to feel. So there's a big focus on like feeling the movement rather than showing the technical prowess. And as someone who didn't have that much technical background, that was huge to me because I could see myself in that. Whereas some of the other auditions, I was like, wow, I just will feel inadequate. Even if I get in, I know I'm going to feel really bad. But I had a big focus on creativity, choreography, even at 18, 19. So I wanted to go somewhere that would foster that more than the technical. Of course, you always need the technical as well, but I just knew where my focus wanted to be.
How did you find the transition from, because Fontis is in Holland, did you find there was any transition? Did you love being in Holland? Were you homesick?
The transition was fine. It was big, moving country, but I wasn't too disturbed. I think it was in like October I came back for the first time and saw the dogs and all that. And that was fantastic. And I was really happy there for a year and a half. And then, like anywhere, it's new, it's exciting, it's shiny. And then you get used to it and you start to see the problems. And I kind of got very tired very quick of certain elements of the culture. People are fantastic there and I have great friends there still. But I definitely felt a little bit out of place. My fourth year, we do an internship year, so I left then and I went to Belgium for the year. I still worked in the Netherlands and I still had friends and I stayed there a lot, but I just felt a need for change and a slightly different perspective, which was nice. Actually, it was good to get that fresh perspective and just kind of get out of the same town and have that sort of transition period into being a professional. It's very easy because of that internship phase to get kind of stuck where you are. For some people, that's perfect. If you end up working there and you're delighted to be there, that's grand. I just wasn't really happy there and I could see myself getting stuck somewhere I didn't really want to be if I didn't lift up my roots.
How did you find Belgium then in comparison to maybe like the dance scene in Holland and the dance scene in Ireland?
Both Belgium and the Netherlands were incredibly rich at that period. I mean, they also had good arts funding at that period, but the artistic stuff coming out of both countries very different, surprisingly, considering how close they are. There's very different kinds of work being made, but they were both really inspiring. So I find it really exciting going to see shows, taking workshops, going to auditions, all those things that you want to do at that point. It was very exciting for me there, and I wasn't so inspired by Ireland at the time. We were still a little bit behind. A lot of people hadn't returned to Ireland that have now returned to Ireland and brought huge wealth of knowledge with them. Also, the funding system was kind of only kicking in to the level it is now. So there was a feeling of, I don't want to go back to Ireland because it's not going to be as good. And I think I was really surprised when I did by how rich the scene is. I think I just had these ideas in my head based off of what? I don't know. I mean, there's a huge difference in terms of the style of dance now and then that was being made, but that was really exciting to be able to move kind of between the different countries and pick up and put down what you do and don't want from each different style and build yourself. I don't know how it is everywhere, but I know in the Netherlands people used to say they could pick out at an audition who trained at which school because you just get this style built into you physically. So I think it was nice to kind of try to shake that off. I really don't think I've ever shaken it off. I don't know if you can. But it was interesting to try and pick up what I liked from each different country, I think.
That's really interesting. Wow. Yeah, I would love to see if that even applies to like different art forms. I'd say it absolutely does.
I think it has to, especially at bachelor level. I think sort of worship your teachers in a way, or your peers, where you kind of start to emulate what they're doing and the styles that they're working in, which is completely natural. Just haven't found your own way yet, but it's just very funny to look around you and notice that. I think by the time you start to really push professionally, you do start to lose that because you work with different people and you get new inspirations. But definitely fresh out of college, like you would have been able to spot us a mile off who went to which school.
And so then when did you decide to come back to Ireland and why?
The why is interesting. I didn't have a choice. I was driven back by COVID. I was living in Belgium. COVID started to break out. My mom got whiff of it. She was like, oh, you should come home for a little holiday. And she knew I was not going back, but she just didn't want me to be trapped in Belgium where, you know, I had friends, but, you know, they were going to go home to their family and all that. And she knew I'd just be kind of stuck there. So she was very clever in that. And I arrived home, I think 3 days before the lockdown really hit, with a small backpack on my back thinking I was going home for a couple of days. I did leave again, but I came back again because it is where I want to be.
That is quite the transition for you. How have you found that? Because it hasn't been that long either.
No, it has not. And I mean, I thought it would take longer to settle in, I suppose, because everyone was in lockdown. Also, all the artists and all the artistic directors were suddenly very available to have conversations. So I was very lucky. Like, I started to just reach out to people and be like, look, I've just arrived. Can I have a Zoom chat with you and just see what's happening? So I got very quickly involved in that sense. But then, you know, actually getting feet on the ground and doing artwork took time, obviously, because of the lockdown. So I did a lot of research in fields and woodlands, like everyone did. I think I was lucky in a way that it was happening, that I arrived back when I did, because it gave me time to settle without feeling left behind because everyone was stopped. So the fact that I had stopped, it didn't feel like I was being left behind. It didn't feel like I was stuck. Everyone was. So everyone was chatting over Zoom and making plans. You don't know if they're ever going to happen, and working on online creations and all that stuff we're all very traumatized by.
And before leaving Belgium, had you thought about coming back?
Not at all. Things were going well there. I was happy with the rolling of my career and where I was, and I didn't have any thoughts about coming back. I was doing the odd bit of work in Ireland, but I didn't consider basing myself here. Again, I had all these assumptions, especially about the funding system. I had these assumptions that turned out they just were not true at all. But also I was happy with what I was working on. I was working on a lot of what I thought were really interesting interactive performances in street and non-traditional contexts that were really exciting for me, that are easier to access in the Netherlands and Belgium because they have a bigger emphasis on young artists working in non-traditional contexts than we do, or than we did. It's changed. I definitely hadn't thought about coming back. I was really happy there and everything was going well, but I'm actually one of those many people actually who, I know it's a terrible thing to say, but you know, I'm grateful for what the lockdown did for me personally in terms of my career and my personal life. It really gave me a hard reset where I think I needed one as well, and brought me back to Ireland, which I'm eternally grateful for the support that I've had since I came back.
What was your next step after coming out of COVID, talking to these people that you met on Zoom?
The first things I did were trying to get in touch, I suppose, with my own like kind of local. So I'm from Bray originally and would have done all my, you know, amateur dance stuff in the Mermaid. So that was kind of one of the first things I did. And Julie Kelleher, who's the now ex artistic director there, was kind of recently in the door herself. She was amazing. She immediately was so welcoming and took me seriously, which is what I was actually really worried about when when you come back and you've had whatever amount of years working and then suddenly you're new again and emerging again, which I was still emerging, but it just felt like I had to do a hard reset, and she didn't give me that feeling, which I really appreciated. And I've been really lucky to have support from her and the mermaid since then, which I really have appreciated and has really gone far for me. It was through that I started to apply to Arts Council funding, which I hadn't really known enough about before I came back. And another fantastic person who really helped me out when I came back was an artist called Sharon Murphy, who I'd known from my DYDC days, and she helped me out with my first applications and kind of showed me the ropes. I don't know if I would have actually managed to settle into that kind of funding system without her, because I've been making funding applications and stuff in the Netherlands and in Belgium, and that was fine. You win some, you lose some, but it was going all right. But then I came back and it's a completely new system. Even if you write a great application, if you don't hit the buzzwords, yourself. So Sharon really helped me out there off the kind of goodness of her own soul to just show me the ropes and kind of get me going, I suppose.
Have you noticed any major differences between like funding systems?
They're super different, incredibly different. And I have to say I much prefer the system here. Now, that's not to say it's better or worse. That's really subjective, but I found the Netherlands difficult because there was a lot of project funding for short-term projects. So you could be making 6 different pieces in a year just to earn enough to eat. Artistically, it's tough. You eventually just wring the juices out of your creativity, but also it just doesn't seem particularly sustainable. I don't see necessarily the draw to that personally. If you don't get time to research and really develop, at least not at that early stage. One of the things that they did have, which was great, was for the more established companies, they did have multi-annual funding, which obviously is a big sticking point for everyone. There's wins and there's losses. But I really loved when I came back the focus on time for research and development, the time for, bursaries and time to develop your craft, which I just haven't seen in the Netherlands. And maybe it existed and I just hadn't gotten to that point yet. But the focus on it in Ireland was huge for me. It feels so much more sustainable and it feels so much more artistic rather than what was starting to feel almost slightly commercialized. It's kind of production wheel, piece after piece, and having to constantly have an idea. But this focus here, which I still really appreciate, is like take the time to develop the idea before you start to make the piece, because there's so much stuff I made in the early days that was really under researched because I just didn't have the time, and I don't have that kind of financial freedom to take months and months to research something unpaid. So I really like that appreciation of all of the different levels that go into making a piece of art.
Do you feel like you may go back to Belgium or Holland in the future?
I don't think I'd ever go back. I still visit, I still see work there, and I still really like the work that's coming out of the countries, but I think just on a kind of a personal level, the culture didn't suit me so well. In terms of long-term, like longevity, I'm at that age now where, I want to be where I'm going to settle. I did live in Portugal for 2 years in the meantime. I was kind of doing a bopping back and forth. So I was kind of living between here and living in Portugal. And I really did love it there, but the funding system wasn't strong. So while I love the culture, the weather, all of those nice things, here is definitely the place that I chose to kind of settle myself for so many reasons. I mean, I'm really delighted to be around family. I'm really delighted to be around a culture that feels good, but also it's just so much more sustainable to be an artist. I know we love to complain about funding systems, but I actually really like the Irish system. There's always things to improve. But for me, I think it's the most sustainable that I've seen in terms of like building a life and building a family and all of that while being in the arts. I just can't really imagine that in the other countries that I've been in.
You've gotten bursaries and residencies, but you also took part in the Hatch. Anytime I've read about it, I haven't fully understood what it actually is. Could you describe what the program is and how maybe you heard about it, how you applied for it, how that process was?
I think probably the reason why Hatch seems so elusive from the outside, so it's kind of a program through Dance Ireland, and it supports both emerging artists and established artists kind of in tandem. And I think why it's kind of elusive is because it's really shaped by you, what you want to do, and the mentor that you end up working with. So I came to it on the emerging artist side. I think it was the year that I arrived back in Ireland, if I'm not mistaken. And I was paired up with Lisa Cliff, who is just the nicest person you'll ever meet in your life. And like I didn't know what I was looking to get out of it per se. I knew artistically what I was busy researching. She knew what she was researching, but it was so much more about the conversation than it was about anything else. The kind of sharing of just thoughts and ideas along the way. But I suppose it's similar to like a residency, except that it's not 1 week. It's just kind of space and time to research and reflect. And at the time I was just really interested in interactive and immersive performances. So I was just really digging into what does that actually mean to me? What is it about it that's interesting? Lisa was just a really great sounding board. It's something that can be a little bit intense about Ireland is really into mentorships more than anywhere I've ever seen. I've had so many mentors in this country and I love it. And I've learned from so many amazing people, but sometimes it can be a bit confronting. And Lisa never made me feel like I needed to question myself in the nicest way possible. I did question myself, but I never felt like I had to. So I think that's for me what Hatch was just that really moment to just quite vulnerably have conversations with another dancer that's at a very different point in their career and just be a sounding board while you research what you're researching. Our topics and our themes were completely different, but they were really valuable conversations, sometimes just to speak out loud what you're thinking and have someone just, I get you. That's for me what the big strength of Hatch was. Everyone has a completely different pathway through it. It really depends also what phase you're in a creative process. I was just really in that reflective phase of just thinking about what it meant to me, all of these things I was interested in. But some people might be further in a creative process and be using it to make or to collaborate. I think I might have been one of those people of what did you do? But it's exactly that I really appreciate about the supports that exist in Ireland, and more we're supporting that. There's real importance in creating stuff that can be shared, in participative projects that work with communities. Like that is so important and valuable, especially when we're using public funding for this. But there's also such a value on the other side, which I really love, that there's a shared weighting of those two aspects. It's like, I need to share my art with the community, but I also need to understand my art in order to share it. And at that point in time, I was like, I'm really obsessed with immersive work and I don't know why. And I want to be able to make it, but I need to understand why do I like it in order to be able to make it. So I really like that you can make a piece of work as part of Hatch or as part of any of these kind of programs. But you can also take the time to just kind of figure out what it is that you want. Especially in your early days, you just start making stuff because you have an idea, but you don't understand the idea yet. And then you get to the end of the process and you're like, it didn't satisfy me and I'm not sure why. And it's not until you kind of take that time to reflect, and sometimes we do that kind of process in reverse. It's only after the piece that you're like, now I understand myself, which can be part of the process. But for me at that point, I just really needed to understand it before I could do it.
Why do you like immersive work so much?
I like immersive work because I have the attention span of a squirrel. And I think it's not uncommon. And I find immersive work can be accessible work. I'm really, really interested in disability and accessibility in the arts. Immersive work can be really inaccessible. But in the context that I found out that I love it, I like it because it creates an accessibility. For me, it can be accessible for people like me who have short attention spans, or a variety of different ways that brains work. But it can also be really accessible for people who don't know art, who don't feel like they belong in art. Can be really accessible for communities that have not been quote unquote educated in art. So I don't think you have to be educated to enjoy it, but there's a sense of that sometimes because you're just in it. You know, there's a big difference between going to the haunted houses at Halloween and watching a horror movie. They're really different experiences. That's a really commercialized way of expressing it, but it's very easy to distance yourself from something when you're just watching it passively. But once you're in it, it's very hard to distance yourself from it. So I think there's also a huge responsibility on us as artists when we do work in immersive ways, because it can be so confronting, which is another thing I was thinking about during that period, is like, what can you do and not do to respect your audience? But I really like it because it just brings you closer. And in a time where I think we've gotten so used to Netflix and we've kind of maybe lost, as a broad idea, we might have lost a little bit of the ability to really feel what we're looking at. I feel like getting just that step closer, it just allows us to maybe feel more than judge. And I think with dance, that's one of the things that I encountered so much and it frustrated me a lot, was people wanted to understand dance the same way you understand theatre or a novel. But for me, dance needs to be felt the same way you feel classical music. It's a very different experience, and immersive work allowed me to kind of just blur that line. I don't think I've found it yet, but it just got me a step closer to where I wanted my audience to be. Like, you can't brief an audience when they're walking into the room and be like, you need to think about this the way you think about music. That would be patronizing. But somehow when you put it into a different context, it allows people to kind of get out of that analytical part of their brain where they're trying to understand the story, and they can just kind of immerse themselves quite literally in the sensation that it's bringing them in. And for me, at least, as an audience, I love that. So I don't see the point in making art that I wouldn't love as an audience. There's value in every different type of art, but this is just the one that I particularly love myself from the outside and from the inside.
I love immersive work, and I think it is that thing of accessibility, because I find people who are not in the arts, like family and friends, and you'd ask them, why don't you go to say theatre or dance? Like, because they feel like the physical building is not welcoming. It's literally the architecture or the space. So I think you are right in terms of immersive. It's a little bit easier to spin it on its head.
Yes, and that's what I loved so much about site-specific work as well before I came back to Ireland and before COVID, because that also kind of complicated things. I was performing in cafes, in shopping centres, on the side of the canal. It's almost like a guerrilla performance. You can be doing your shopping and you just, what is this weird thing I'm looking at? And then you go on with your day, but you've had that little dose and it just brings you that step closer to feeling like maybe you belong. Or maybe you don't want to belong, but you just got this little spark of enjoyment in your day. Because that's something I also personally really like in work, is there's a space for that really tragic work to exist. I just personally don't love to see it, and I don't love to make it because I'm too sensitive. So I love to make work that's kind of joyful and sparks moments of pleasure, I suppose. Pleasure that has meaning, don't get me wrong, but twisting things on their head, I suppose. And I do miss that kind of just meeting people who have never seen dance before, or circus, or any of those other kind of art forms that I would have worked in on the street performance side or site-specific side, and just like really watching their faces light up when they go from, what is this, until like, that's quite fun actually, I want to join in, especially when it's an interactive piece. You see people go from like skeptical, like, get out of my way, I'm trying to do my shopping, to like, oh, let me touch that balloon. And I love that transformation that you can see just in people's, like, I don't know, life's kind of tough, to put it lightly. I think no matter what walk of life you're in, it's hard. And so just being able to be a cause for someone to have a little moment of something different in a day is really nice. And I have seen it happen. You meet someone in a site-specific performance who they enjoyed it, and then they come and see one more, and then they come see one more, and then suddenly you meet them after premiere in the theatre and they're like, yeah, now I feel like I belong, because I've seen a couple of pieces of dance in spaces where I frequented, and now I feel like I can sit here and not feel out of place, which I think is just great. Theatres should be a space for everyone. All art spaces should, but I do think that there's a lot of barriers internally and externally for that. And there's some great models now in Ireland. Like, we're doing great in some fantastic venues, but I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done around that.
Have you had many mentors or taken part in any mentorship programs?
I've had so many mentors at this point. I'm not even sure I could list them. And I've been really lucky. It's been through a lot of these kind of research development, bursary kind of style programs. And sometimes they're formal mentorships, and sometimes it's more like, can you collaborate with me? But I'm kind of interested in learning from you as we do that. But I've had some really fantastic people along the way. At the moment, I'm working with a poet from the States, called Alicia Harris, who, it's one of those ones where it's a mentorship, not a mentorship, but I'm learning so much. And it's just having the opportunity to reach out to someone that I have like looked up to and listened to her work probably since I was about 16. I danced to her work in college. I used one of her pieces as the soundtrack to my audition solo. I was really looked up to her, and having the opportunity through the systems that we have in place through our funding to just reach out to her and be like, hi, I know this is random, but it's been like multiple times like that, where it's people that I really look up to that I then have the chance to learn from. And I think there's such a value in that, so much value, especially across different disciplines. That's, I think, where I've seen for me the most value, is learning from how other people approach a theme or a topic or an idea, and then seeing what happens if I do that with the body or not with the body, and with words or music or all these different things. And, you know, choreography is always going to be at the core of it for me, but learning from other artists who are so much further along in their career and who have very different artistic backgrounds, it's been so enriching. So as much as sometimes it can be really confronting, and I've had a couple of mentorships where I was really confronted and I didn't enjoy them because they confronted me, but afterwards I was really appreciative of the work that I put into them. And then mentorships that turned into friendships and turned into work collaborations. There's something really interesting about that relationship that can be built when you have enough time. I suppose it's very different to meet someone once or twice than to spend 6 months or a year talking once a week. I talk to Alicia at the moment probably more than I talk to most of my friends. It's kind of wild, but it's also birthed so many interesting moments of reflection, because there's just a different kind of artistic intimacy you can have with someone who's not your colleague and not your friend. I feel it's more honest, at least.
How does that feel, working with a mentor artist who you've admired since you were 16?
It was weird at the start. especially when it's someone whose voice you're used to hearing on Spotify. That was very strange. And I have to say, I was really lucky it wasn't one of those situations where you like meet your hero and then they're awful. Like, she's a fantastic human being. So I'm really lucky in that, because there's something terrible about when it does happen the other direction. But actually, it's been super natural. At the start, I was definitely a little bit like weirdly starstruck. I was like, I know I shouldn't be starstruck. You're not Britney Spears, but you know, this is the voice I've been listening to in these poems for a very long time. But there's also just something so great when you're having these conversations with someone that you respect artistically to that degree. I don't know, it really feeds this like spark and just drive to be creative. And we've been working through this book called The Artist's Way, which is a very well-known book around creative well-being. It's been a real interesting experience getting to know someone like that, and also having those kind of conversations and seeing that just kind of feed back into my own feelings around creativity and then creative experiences.
Could you explain from ways you could mentor or be mentored by someone?
Mentorships are just so personal. They can, there's so many different formats they can take. And I think it depends a huge amount on the mentor's outlook on that relationship. I've had mentorships that felt like teacher-student relationships, which I learned a lot from. And I've had mentorships that just felt like a friendship with someone who has a lot more experience than me. Those tend to be, for me, the ones that I feel the most fruitful, because I can relax into them. But I also know there's some people who flourish a lot in the other side, and having someone kind of a little bit more structured. I suppose there's all the degrees in between basically having a teacher or having a friend that knows a lot. It really depends person per person what works for them. So I think at the start, like I wasn't really sure what I needed or from who I needed or what format I needed it in. But now, whatever amount of years in, I kind of know what I'm looking for, and I know the kind of personalities that I will gel with in a way that allow me to be vulnerable enough to get what I need to get out of it, instead of kind of trying to protect my poor artistic self inside, which tends to be where I go when I feel that student-teacher relationship, which I'm sure needs to be thought about more deeply, but let's just leave it there for now. I think mentorships really don't have to happen in the context of a formal mentorship program. They can be a really great place to start, especially if you're at the very early stages of career and you don't know who you want to mentor you. But one of the things about kind of bursaries and that sort of situation that we have here in Ireland is that you have the opportunity to contact someone that you admire, or maybe you've worked with before. You want to learn from them, but you don't want to force them to work for free. It's just a really nice way of being able to say, like, I value you enough to be able to pay you to just talk to me about your experience. And I think some of the most fruitful ones I've had have really just been that I've worked with you, I know a little bit about you, and I want to learn more, but I also don't want to take advantage of your kindness, because there's so many lovely people in the arts that would do it out of the kindness of their own hearts. We all have bills to pay, so it's nice when you can. One of the best ones I had was with a producer called Elena Kreusch from Austria. We went on to work together really extensively because we did start from that place of just like, I want to learn from you, talk to me. Rather than teach me everything you know, it was just like, let's talk, help me work through some of my applications, and as we go, we'll get to know each other. And we ended up working together for quite a long time. I have so much to thank her for everything I know now about the other side of the table, and a lot of the work that I do that's in cultural production. It's really down to her and down to that. The first bursaries I had from the Arts Council was working with her.
How did you find, which is very common in the arts, being based in one country but working in the other, kind of hopping between countries? Especially, I think, as a dancer, that must be so hard on your body as well as your mind. How did you find that, or how did you get through it?
It kind of wrecked me, if I'm honest. I'm not tip-top health-wise, so the kind of 4 a.m. starts and the not sleeping and the overnight travel and stuff, it really wiped me. But there's kind of a sense in the dance world that you should be able for it, and you have to be able for it, and that's just how things are. And if you try to advocate for yourself for even like better travel conditions, it's not often that people respond well to that, I think. And I mean, part of that's down to just that there's not enough funding for the amount of travel that needs to be done. But also there's just part of that, I think, is just this systematic idea that a dancer has to just be grateful and also be perfectly healthy. As much as there's a lot of work being done around accessibility for all different physicalities and presentation, I think there's still a lot of work to be done in the dance world around energy levels. So I really, really struggled with that. And it was one of the big reasons why I stopped doing that, because I just really felt it affecting my health and my well-being. I really don't travel for work internationally anymore unless I absolutely have to. Even nationally, I don't do so many of residential residencies it doesn't suit me very well, and I don't want to have to do that unless I'm in a really good spot for it. But I definitely found it very challenging, and it's something I try and advocate for now, is like when I am working on productions and I have other people coming in, is like, we don't have to work like that just because we were taught to work like that. I can still get the same amount of work done in a shorter day with better conditions, and we'll all go home happy, and realistically we'll get better work done than if you're kind of half awake. Like, I'm vividly remembering now, straight out of my third year of my dance education, so I wasn't even graduated yet, and during the summer, my third year, I went to Mexico on a tour with a company as part of an internship, which was a fantastic experience. But we performed in Portugal one night, and then we got on a plane 6 a.m. or something to go to Mexico. And we had some days in Mexico before we performed, so we had time to rest and recover there. But then we performed the last night in Mexico. I had to get on a flight at like 5 a.m. Now, I made the mistake of staying up and celebrating, because not everyone had to be on that flight. Got to the Netherlands, slept for a couple of hours, went to the next festival, performed there, ended up with food poisoning from the flight back from Mexico, came off the stage, went to get sick, performed 4 times a day for like 3 days, slept only a few hours on the last night, and then I went into rehearsals at like 9 a.m. the next morning, and I thought I was invincible. I was young, I really hadn't figured out my own limits, and I vividly remember like doing an improvisation with 2 other dancers, and I closed my eyes for a second, and I swear to God, I fell asleep awake. Like, I was standing up and I just kind of drifted into sleep for a few seconds, and I think that was probably the moment I was like, I have a lot of stamina, but I don't have that much stamina. See, I think like the dance world can be so toxic because no one forced me to do that. I did that to myself willingly. I'm not blaming any company or anyone for doing that to me. These were different work commitments that I lined up like that. I think we internalize a lot of the sensation that we're kind of superhuman, and we have to be, and we really don't. There's absolutely no need to be superhuman to be a really good dancer. I think it's just a systematic kind of a stigma we've imposed upon our own community.
Now that is intense. That is another level. I can see why you say no now. We've talked about it before, well-being and also burnout in the arts. It's because of the uncertainty and the freelancing. You don't know when your next job is, so it's usually you're cramming them all into one. And I have found that usually people are very nice in the arts, and they find it very difficult, particularly in Ireland, to say no. I am totally guilty of it, but it is really, really hard when you know a lot of people, or you're kind of familiar with them. You know, you just want to help sometimes, but again, there is a cost to that.
I think we do it to ourselves and we do it to each other too much. I think the new generation of artists are becoming much more aware of this, the measures that are being put in terms of accessibility. They're improving things for everything. That's why I'm always harping on about this, but I'm like, accessibility is not just for people who actually desperately need it. It's for everyone. You know, an accessible process is more pleasant and more fruitful for everyone. But there's also like a real personal responsibility when it comes to these kind of things. Like, there's a system. The system is flawed. We're not going to have financial stability particularly soon, despite like some great efforts to make that happen. But we have to, as individuals, safeguard our mental health. And there's a big lack of that in the arts still. There's still a massive amount of work that needs to be done around mental health accessibility. We talk a lot about disability accessibility, which is so important. But I see a lot of people still suffering from not having accessibility measures in place that would protect their mental health. And I think as artists, there's not really any evidence yet whether it's cause or correlation, but there's a lot of artists who have issues around mental health as a community. Step up how we treat each other and offering each other the kind of working conditions that will support our own and everyone else's mental health, because otherwise you hit that burnout. You see so many artists late 20s, early 30s being like, do you know, it's not worth it. And it's not, because your mental health is so much more important than your career. But it would be just great if we could have both, please and thank you. So I think I take it on as kind of a personal mission, and I know so many other artists who are doing the same. Is I would have loved X, Y, and Z, and especially as an emerging artist, to learn how to stand up for myself and what is a healthy working environment. And there's so many fantastic programs like Safe to Create who are like doing this on a systematic level as well. But there's also so many artists who just themselves are starting to say like, nope, that's not how we're going to work. I'm working a lot with Musici Ireland, who are amazing at this. Like, access is at the core of everything they do now, and it's just so beautiful to see the different level of vulnerability that can exist when you feel cared for. And that it's really fruitful art as well, to feel safe. You can be so much more honest and real, and all of those things create that productivity that they're trying to get out of us by whipping us. But it doesn't work, because then you get scared and you just start to freeze up and eventually burn out. But if we could actually just all feel safe and relaxed, the art and the creativity can flow so much easier and without all of those extra things that come along with it. I think our younger generations are really aware of this, but because of the structuring of like formal education, a lot of the people that are in positions of power don't necessarily have regard for this. Your peers might be really understanding of physical or mental struggles that you might be experiencing, but in an education system, there's such a power dynamic going on that you do hide things. And the funny thing is, being on the other side of that dynamic now, I know when someone's injured and I know when someone's not right with their mental health. Like, you can feel it, you know it. And that's something where I think we've kind of failed as an industry, is like the people in power should be safeguarding those things and not allowing young artists to learn these unhealthy habits. I live with bipolar disorder. I didn't know this when I was in college, and I was just like wildly unwell. But I had no idea. I just thought this is what it feels like to be an artist. And it's completely acceptable to be all of these like extreme emotions and extreme feelings. And it wasn't until I graduated, got into the real world, and I was like, something's not right. And I got diagnosed, and I was going through all this, and I was talking to an old teacher much later on, explaining all of this to them. And they said to me, oh yeah, but sure, we used to be in the teacher's room asking, what is going on with Ali? She's not okay. Like, there's something going on. But no one talked to me. No one said like, look, we're a little bit concerned. Are you okay? No one thought to do that, or no one had the kind of forethought to kind of come to me and say like, is there something going on that we need to be aware of? Maybe I would have just brushed it off, but also maybe I would have said, oh, if it's so obvious from the outside, maybe there is something I should address. And it's the same with injuries. It's the absolute same with injuries. And it's the same in so many different areas of the arts, where I think there has been in the past a situation of people with positions of power not seeing the responsibility they have to people's well-being necessarily. I think we kind of bestow too much maturity on really young minds. Exactly what I was saying earlier on is like, you're dropped into the situation where you're expected to be this mature adult and look after yourself, but you've just come from secondary school where like your teachers sometimes had to tell you to go home because you looked so unwell. And now suddenly like, oh, you can look after your own injury. If it's too sore, sit down. But, you know, if it's too sore and you sit down, you're not going to get the part. So there's kind of a dynamic that's not really teaching young people to advocate for themselves. And to be honest, it's not until you reach nearly 30 that you start to advocate for yourself and realize that you are allowed to do that. And also specifically in the dance world, that you have enough of a footing to do that, to say like, no, and I'm not going to lose the job because I've gotten this far. Because I've lost jobs by saying, no, those are not the conditions that I'm willing to work under. And at this point, it's okay. But when I was 23, I couldn't have afforded to lose the job. So you just do it. And then you put yourself at risk, and then you burn out, and then you're out for 2 months, and it's significantly worse in the end. But I do think that there's a massive shift happening. So while I'm saying all of this, I'm also aware that there's so many fantastic people in positions of power now that are really aware of this and are shifting that dynamic. So while I can complain, I also think there's so much great work being done in Ireland and abroad around like understanding that careers need to be sustainable and the longevity of that, and safeguarding, and not seeing artists and performers as kind of this disposable entity that, well, next year there's going to be a new fresh batch of them. That capitalist mindset, like, we really have to reshape how we look at people as people and not as product.
Some listeners who might be just beginning their career, or even younger, who are thinking about a dance career, what advice would you give them?
The biggest piece of advice would be to kind of reflect. And maybe I wouldn't give this advice, but I'm going to say it anyway, to reflect on why you actually want to do this. Because I think it took me way too long to actually get to the core of why I took the route I did, which took me on a really roundabout route to where I am now, and which I could have probably done a little bit of a shortcut if I had known what my actual motivations were. Especially as a performer, you can get really mixed up because you're getting so much praise for being good at X, Y, and Z, and you're just like, I'll just chase that praise. And for a lot of people, it's not until much later on that you start to realize, like, okay, the praise is flat after a certain amount of time. So what actually motivates me intrinsically? Like, what is it that I actually want for me, not for someone else's appreciation? And I don't think I would have understood that at 18. I remember getting feedback from an artist I really admired. So she was a 4th year choreography student who I really had a lot of respect for. And I think I was a 1st year dance student. And I came off stage, and I happened to be living in the same house there at the time. So I asked her afterwards, like, do you have any feedback for me? And she's like, you need to stop being so pretty on stage. Stop trying to be beautiful. I was like, that's terrible advice. And it wasn't until probably 4 years later that I was like, nah, I get it now. I get it. Like, she was really trying to tell me, like, Don't do it for someone else. Stop trying to be what you expect people to want from you and do what you want to do. As an artist, as a performer, as all of those things, I just don't think there's sustainability while you're just trying to please other people or gain accolades or feed that kind of dopamine demon that we all contain. I don't really think that that's a way to do it that's sustainable. But also as an artist, you're not going to make art that's authentic and real and connects with people as long as you're trying to impress people. And that took me far too long to realize. I feel like I'm still realizing it every day. Is like all of these things in my life. I'm like, wait, why do I do this? Is this because I want to do it, or is it because people have told me that this is great when I do it? Down to like washing the dishes, you know? Do I want to wash the dishes, or am I afraid someone's going to judge me for not washing the dishes? So I think if I believed my 18-year-old self would actually listen to me, if I told her that, which she absolutely wouldn't have. And I think a lot of performers do this. We're just really drawn in by what we think is the glamour of it and people praising us and all of that, which is great. And eventually it rusts like anything else. And then you need to know why you're doing it for it to still have any meaning. So while I don't believe I would have listened to myself at 18, I think that's the advice I need to hear every single day, realistically. It's so important as well that your identity as an artist doesn't get tied to being an artist. I've learned this over the last year. I took some time away from heavy creating and I started another, still very much in the arts, but different type of job because I needed the headspace. It took me a really long time to detach my identity from being an artist, and that's who I am, and that's what gives me value as a human being and as part of society, is that I am an artist and it makes me special. To detach from that and realize how much of my drive to create was also being pushed by this drive to realize the potential of this being that I thought I wanted to be. And now how I've begun to disentangle that and realize how much more freedom I feel creatively now, knowing that I'm a human being who makes art. I'm not an artist. It's a lovely term. It's great. But I do think we tie our identity, we tie our value to it to a degree where you don't feel like you can do anything else without losing your whole sense of self, and which is a really dangerous place to be in. And I think as a dancer, you know it, because the moment you do get an injury, you lose touch with yourself. And I think it's the same in any artistic discipline when suddenly, and I think everyone felt this around COVID, when they take that away from you, you're just like a shell of a human being because you don't actually know who you are as a person. You know, being an artist, it's intrinsically linked with your soul, but it's also your job. And if I was a shopkeeper, if I was working in retail and my whole identity was being a retail sales agent, that would be really weird. No, I'm a person and that's the job that I do, but I have all of these different passions and loves and hates and connections in the world, and they're what make me a person. But somehow as an artist, your art is what makes you a human being, which it just feels for me like you're setting yourself up for disaster. I think there's a lot to be done around recognizing that art is not the end. And like that, I could be a farmer tomorrow and I would be okay because I'm a human who has all these different layers and I'm faulty and I'm juicy and I'm all these great things, not just because I'm an artist, but because I'm a person who makes art.
But we've just been asking out of curiosity what they'd like to see different in the funding of the arts in Ireland or in other countries, or if they've noticed different programs in other countries that are really beneficial to the arts.
Yeah, I've been really intimately in the world of funding from kind of all sides of the table, as the artist applying, as the assessment panel, as the person hosting the funding, all the different sides. And I've thought very deeply about this. I'm really, really passionate about equality, diversity, inclusion in the arts. If you get me started on that, your podcast would be 4 hours long. I could talk for years on it. I think that's what I really, really want to see. I'm really actively working in my own space. I see a lot of other fantastic organizations and cultural producers and artists advocating and working on this as well. How can we make the funding system more accessible? There's so many different elements and parts to accessibility. They're just not present yet to the degree that they need to be. And there's some really great work being done. Arts and Disability Ireland do an amazing funding scheme for disabled artists that is really accessible, by my opinion, for the cohort that they're catering for. I've been lucky enough to be funded through them multiple times. The way they take a different approach, and it's so much more human. It just really works on a really grand scale that's difficult to achieve. But there's so much about how we could completely reimagine our funding system to be inclusive of all different people, coming from any kind of a background, whether you're an artist with a disability, whether you're an artist from a working class background, whether you're an immigrant artist whose first language is in English. There's so many barriers to the funding system. You've almost got to write it master's thesis to get funding these days. And it shouldn't be like that. And it has had to evolve like that because the competition is fierce. There's so many fantastic artists and there's not enough money. And that is just the reality we're living in. But I just think we need to get as creative with our funding systems as we get with our art. Seeing so many artists moving into cultural production roles, it gives me hope that we're going to be a little bit more creative and start to reinvent the wheel a little bit. Because while the funding systems do a good job, like they uphold this myth that the arts is a meritocracy and it's the best artists get the funding. And we all know that that's not the truth. The truth is, if you're good at writing, you get the funding. And hopefully the art will reflect that. But it's not fair if you don't have a third level degree. You didn't learn to write to that degree that they're expecting from you. It's not fair if English is not your first language. It's not fair if you're neurodiverse. It's not fair if you live in any kind of a condition that's not very, very privileged, to be quite honest. And I think we're all very aware of it now. It's not a secret. It's just a case of like the capacity in funding organizations is really stretched to the limit, and trying to advocate for organizations to put the time and the resources into like literally reinventing the wheel. It's not going to be easy, but I do think that there's going to be so much value that can come from it. And there's so many amazing voices that are pushing for that agenda. Just the final word on that is just that I do think that there is a way to do it. I don't know what that is. I'm hunting for it in my own work. I'm doing that work on my own side of the wheel and seeing what's going to happen and experimenting. We'll see. I really think that we might have a funding system that looks really different in 10 years. And I really hope we do, because I'd love to see equal opportunities for people from any background. I'm lucky enough to have a way with words. So many dancers are not. And that's one of the reasons they go into dance. And then it becomes really difficult to get funding. And then it's the same for people from so many different backgrounds, that there's a barrier there that just, it doesn't need to be. Like, if you're a great artist, you're a great artist. If you've got a great idea, you've got a great idea. It shouldn't matter whether you can write an essay on it or not, or use the IT system, or all those different things that are barriers. So yeah, that's my bugbear that I'm really obsessed with, and will probably continue to be obsessed with. And you'll probably hear me ranting on about it in 20 years' time. But I really think that there's huge work being done and there's huge potential for change. It's giving organizations time to do that in a way that's ethical and that's well thought through, because I think if we rush that process, we're going to end up with the same problem in a different format. It's a bit of patience, I think, on the side of those of us who want to see change. Organizations need to take time to do this properly, to give it the time it needs and the time it deserves, because it's an issue that affects everyone. It affects the artists, but it also affects the audiences and the communities that participate, who don't necessarily have the opportunity to work with the artists that reflect them. And then you get that sense of alienation in the arts. So it's a big thing. And I think it's going to change with the right time and patience, and artists saying what they need as well, and not being afraid to contact the organization and say, like, look, this isn't actually accessible for me. What can we do about that? Because I think every organization I've ever come across in Ireland would be more than happy to find a solution. But I think we automatically assume if it's not accessible for me, it's not for me. But I think a lot of the time it's ignorance, and unintentional ignorance. Like, it's just not being in your shoes, and that's changing and it's going to change. But in the meantime, like, self-advocate and say, like, can you do this instead so that I can have equal opportunity?
Ali, honestly, it's been such a privilege to have you on and to share on your experience and being so open and honest with us. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that really appreciate it too.